My name is Father Andrew, and I am a Roman Catholic priest. After growing up on a ranch in northeast Wyoming, I went to college to be a software engineer, but God had other plans for me. He called me into seminary, and after studying theology and growing in my spiritual life for 6 years, I was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Cheyenne in May of 2016. Since then, I have been serving as the parochial vicar of St. Stephen's Indian Mission, where I am learning just how to be the priest that God has called me to be. Currently, with my friends, we are blessed to provide sacramental ministry to St. Stephen's Mission, but in addition, we get to ride and train horses, feed buffalo, and in general help bring new life to the mission by bringing the good news of Jesus Christ to everyone we meet and helping out in every way that we can. I am the Roman Catholic Priest, and these are my stories.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of the Roman Catholic Priest. I have to say that I find this a bit ironic, because the first time that I thought of doing a podcast, the last thing on my mind was doing a monologue. But that's exactly what I'm going to do today. There's nobody here with me today, and today all I wanted to do was share with you my vocation story as kind of a kickoff to this podcast. So before I launch into my story, just a couple points on what I see this podcast being and what I hope to do with this podcast. So ideally, it is not just me monologuing like I'm going to be doing today, but ideally I will be having guests on my podcast, various people from throughout the Diocese of Cheyenne, friends, and we're going to hear stories. We're going to hear just the life of the Diocese of Cheyenne. So that will include such people as Deacon Mike Lehman, who is our legislative liaison, where we'll get into some issues with the law and politics. I hope to get some of the youth ministers on from around the state, maybe some of my priest friends, Deacon Bryce Lundgren, who's here at St. Stephen's Mission with me, various people, and we're just going to talk about life and specifically priestly life in the Diocese of Cheyenne through my eyes and from the eyes of a Wyoming perspective. So that's kind of what I envision this podcast being and where it's going. So hang on, bear with me, and we'll kind of figure this out together. And if you're listening, thank you for listening. And I hope that you're enjoying this and that you enjoy following me. And if I can share my heart and give you a better insight into the life of a young priest in the Diocese of Cheyenne, that's kind of what my goal is for this. So that being said, my story is, I grew up on a ranch in northeastern Wyoming. I have two wonderful parents. I have two great brothers. I end up saying that now, but of course, growing up in a family of three boys, it wasn't always so great and wonderful. Greg, my older brother, and I got into plenty of scraps and arguments, as typical brothers would do. My younger brother is mildly autistic. His name is Paul. And so he added a whole dimension to the family that growing up I wasn't even necessarily aware of. He was just my younger brother, and this is how things happened. But ultimately what that ended up meaning is that me and Greg would be the ones who always kind of hung out and did things together when we were at home, and Paul kind of did his own thing, not separate from us, but he didn't often go and play laser tag with me and Greg, and he would do things with us, but to the degree that he was able to. So I grew up middle child of three boys. I grew up on a ranch in northeastern Wyoming and grew up a cradle Catholic. We religiously, so to speak, went to Mass every Saturday night in Gillette at St. Matthew's Catholic Church. So that is my home parish and will always be my home parish. I grew up and was active in the parish. Me and my brother would altar serve, and so I altar served throughout the vast majority of my elementary school years and even into junior high. And I think I served occasionally in high school when there was nobody else that was stepping up to altar serve at Mass. So grew up knowing the faith to some degree, the little bit of CCD classes that I was able to do, and I went through confirmation. And confirmation ended up being a really pivotal moment in my faith journey. I was confirmed in ninth grade by Bishop David Ricken, who is now the current Bishop of Green Bay, Wisconsin. And it surprised me when I was confirmed. I chose the name John the Baptist, and I chose the name John the Baptist for no better reason than he shared my middle name. My middle name is John, and so I chose Saint John the Baptist because we shared a name. But I'm also, so even though that wasn't exactly the most appropriate reason to choose a saint for my confirmation saint, I'm a strong believer that the saint chooses us. And so John the Baptist has been very influential in my life since then. I didn't quite realize that at the time. And so it's beautiful how that has kind of turned out. But back to confirmation, I was sitting there in the pew with my brother. My brother was the first out of the whole group to be confirmed, and he went up and was confirmed. And when I went up to be confirmed by Bishop Ricken, he anointed me and said, "The Lord be with you." And I said, "And also with you," and amen. And he immediately told me right there in the sanctuary that he wanted to see me after Mass. And I was immediately skeptical and maybe a bit scared. Like, why in the world would the bishop want to see me after Mass? And so I went back to my pew and kind of probably thought about that for the rest of Mass. I to be honest, don't really remember. But I found Bishop Ricken in the sacristy after Mass, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Have you ever thought about being a priest?" And my response was fairly typical for a teenager at that point. I hadn't really considered being a priest in a serious way at that point in my life. Sure, I had been altar serving. Sure, there was a number of people that even suggested to me that I thought about being a priest. And sure, I was even one of those kids that played Mass with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders as a pretend chasuble, and my mom made me use Triscuits instead of club crackers for the Eucharist, which still not a fan of Triscuits to this day. I liked club crackers way better than Triscuits, but that's beside the point. So Bishop Ricken asked me if I'd ever considered the priesthood, and my response to him was fairly honest. I said no, I hadn't really considered the priesthood at that point. So Bishop Ricken told me to stay open to the possibility of priesthood. He didn't tell me to be open, he suggested it, which was a huge distinction to make. He was being supportive and encouraging and wasn't acting like an army recruiter trying to recruit seminarians. And so I walked away from that experience open to the possibility of priesthood. And the way that my story continues to play out is throughout high school, still didn't really jump on the priesthood route. I was into computers and computer science, and so I ended up making the decision to go to the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology in Rapid City, South Dakota, where I studied computer science for 3 years. And the beautiful thing about that experience, there's a lot of beautiful things about it, but the one major thing was Bishop Ricken was completely supportive of that decision. I had wondered when choosing to go to School of Mines that Bishop Ricken would be disappointed in me, or he would, somehow try to convince me to enter seminary instead of going to college for computer science, but rather he completely supported my decision to go to the School of Mines. And so that gave me the freedom to pursue priesthood if it were to come up in my time in college, which naturally it did. I didn't quite realize that at the time, though. So I graduated high school and got into college and School of Mines, and was going to Mass regularly purely out of habit. It just felt weird if I didn't go to Mass every Saturday night, or at that point I was going Sunday nights because the Newman Center, the Newman Club at the time, had a Sunday evening Mass, which is really, really helpful for college students who are busy all weekend. So I was still going to Mass, but it wasn't my faith. It was still purely habit, and I was going because I felt that I had to. But I grew up with the desire and the knowledge that Mass was important, even if I didn't quite know why or what I was doing. I was doing it at least because I knew that there's something here that's important. My parents taught me that Mass every weekend was crucially important. And so I kept going to Mass, and I met some friends through that. One of them became my best friend in college. His name is Ben, and he introduced me to a Catholic youth retreat program called Search. He was from Dickinson, North Dakota, and he convinced me to go to this Search program up in the Diocese of Bismarck, North Dakota, and I was initially very, very resistant. Like, I didn't want to go to this youth retreat. I'd been to a high school youth retreat when I was in high school, and I didn't really like it. And so I wondered what I was going to do if I went to this. Basically, it was a confirmation retreat it was high school age, 16 years or older students, unmarried students would go to this Search retreat. And after a bit of prodding, Ben finally convinced me to go with him. And when I went, I was just absolutely blown away by the people my age that went, that were on fire to be Catholics, and were on fire with the love of Jesus Christ. And I was a bit taken aback because I didn't quite have that same zeal, that same passion for my Catholic faith. And that was really the first experience of the Catholic Church with young people, my age people, that showed me that, you know what, maybe there's something more, something deeper to the Catholic faith than I am even aware, even though I'm habitually going to Mass every Sunday. There's a youthfulness here, there's a zeal here that I'm somehow missing out on. So I went to that retreat and came off of it and was just kind of blown away by it, and really was praying into that and trying to figure out then what I was to do with this newfound discovery, this newfound zeal that I was experiencing. Plus, I was going to classes full time, so I was balancing computer science classes with trying to figure out what the Lord was actually trying to say to me through all of this. So I ended up I kept going on through college, was studying well. I went to a number of Search retreats in the Diocese of Bismarck. At that time, we had to drive all the way up to Minot, North Dakota, which was like a 7-hour drive for us one way, but totally worth it. I ended up going on 13 different Search retreats from my entire time in college. It was that important, and I found something there. I found my faith enlivened through that experience, and which prompted a deeper conversion in my own life. And so I went to these 12 additional Search retreats, and when I went back on these Search retreats, I was part of the team, so I got to give talks, and I got to help minister to my peers and younger people than me rediscover their faith, and to really discover the Catholic faith in a whole new way, in a deeper way, in a more joy-filled, loving way. So Search was an incredible part of my own story, my own faith journey, and it really opened my eyes to the necessity of faith, the necessity of the Catholic faith, and the fact that I should be falling in love with Jesus Christ more and more, because he is ultimately the reason for my life. He is the reason for the entire earthly existence, but he's also the reason for my existence. He died for my personal sins as well as everybody else's sins. And so that he is the one that I am ultimately aiming towards, and he is the goal in my life, and he is my friend and my brother and my Savior throughout all of it. So one experience at Search was just kind of what was providential. I mean, I look back on it and I think God was trying to tell me something that I didn't quite realize. This would have been September of 2008. The Search team members, we all gathered a day before Search began to have a team day where we built fraternity amongst ourselves. And the priest on the weekend at that particular Search retreat was Father Basil Atwell, and he is a Benedictine monk from Assumption Abbey in North Dakota, and he was leading this team day. And and we were having a discussion with all the team members, and Father Basil was asking us questions, and I don't even remember what the topic of conversation was, but he ended up calling me out and having me stand up and wanted to play my life out in front of all the team members, and I was kind of a bit, taken aback by this, and he pulled off his Benedictine scapular and put it on me, and he saw very clearly in me a priestly vocation that I was still very hesitant to acknowledge and to notice in my life. And so he pointed this out in front of everybody, and that experience struck a chord in me, and I really took that to prayer and was wondering what that meant for my life. I ended up going to confession that particular retreat and confessed sins in my life that I had never confessed. And I just kind of walked away from that whole retreat experience with this profound hope and desire for priestly ministry that I didn't quite realize that I had. And so that was my second year of computer science, rather. And so I kept praying with that. Wasn't quite sure what to do. I was doing well in computer science. I had all these scholarships with my college basically paid for. And so ultimately I decided to just keep going with computer science, get my degree, and then I would kind of reevaluate and see if there's something else that I needed to do. So I continued that year in college, second year, sophomore year of computer science, and did fantastic, and was interiorly a bit unsteady, but still felt that I was doing the right thing. I'm also fairly stubborn, and so when I started this degree program at School of Mines, I wanted to finish it. So I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to finish it, and we'll see what happens from there. So after that second year, I came back for my junior year, and immediately knew that something wasn't right. I was waking up and just dreading going to class, even though I was still, at this point, I was still a 4.0 student. I could do well in the classes, but I just ended up dreading going to classes. And that fall, I had the profound experience of going to Rome with Father Mike Malloy, who was the rector of the cathedral at the time in Rapid City. He took a group of parishioners, myself included, to Rome on pilgrimage for 10 days. And I had such an awesome time in Rome, experiencing the Universal Church, the ancient city of Rome. And it was just a phenomenal experience, and I came back from that pilgrimage and was even more unsure of what to do, because I realized that staying in computer science was miserable. I still loved technology and still do love technology to this day, and can do cool things with technology like this podcast. But I realized that sitting and writing computer code for Google, for Microsoft, for a company of some sort, was not actually going to fulfill me and to bring me true and lasting joy. And I was finding true joy and fulfillment when I was helping out at these search retreats, when I was on pilgrimage in Rome, when I was helping out with the Edge middle school ministry at the cathedral. I was a team member for that when I was helping out at the Newman Center. I was finding joy in those things, but I wasn't finding joy in my classes at School of Mines. So I wasn't sure what to do, and I kept waiting for God to just write me a letter and say, "Dear Andrew, this is my plan for you. I want you to A, do this, B, do that, C, do this, and if you follow these steps, you'll be good to go, you'll be happy, you'll be joyful, everything will be okay." I was waiting for that letter, but the letter never came. I was in this place of just uncertainty, and I didn't know what to do, and I wanted to finish the degree that I had started, but I also knew that I was going to be miserable doing it. I was just not at all sure what to do. So I ended up going to the National Focus Conference. So this is the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. This was in the January of 2010. It was down in Orlando, Florida, and the theme was Made for More. And so I went to this national focus conference, and it was fantastic, and there were 3,000 to 4,000 Catholic college students who'd gathered, and all these phenomenal speakers and talks and adoration and confessions, and everything was just really awesome. But out of all the things on that trip that I remember the most, the thing that I remember most was an optional talk that I went to. And this optional talk dealt with vocations. And, so I didn't even have to go to this talk, but I went to this talk because I was really struggling with where the Lord was calling me. And so I went to this talk, and the only thing that I remember from this talk was the reality, the truth, that Jesus Christ loves us, and that he loves our freedom so much that he will never flat out tell us what to do. And because if he told us what to do, that would somehow inhibit our freedom. So rather, we, in following Jesus Christ, have to just choose to love and serve him above everything else in our life. So I walked away from that optional talk finally realizing that I wasn't going to get that letter from God saying, Andrew, I want you to do this, in order to be happy and fulfilled and to follow me in your life. Rather, I realized that, okay, I'm not going to get that letter, but in order to be truly joyful and to truly be fulfilled, I just have to choose to follow him above everything else in my life. Which still ultimately didn't give me the roadmap of what exactly I needed to do to get to that point of fulfillment. So I came back from Orlando, went back to school, but at this point I had decided that I wasn't going to continue into my fourth year of computer science. That I actually had applied to the University of Mary in Bismarck, North Dakota, and thought that I would study theology with a minor in computer science or computer information systems, one of the two. And that it would be sort of a bridge for me to keep my computer science degree but also study theology. So I'd actually applied to the University of Mary, was accepted, and that spring semester I took more generic classes. I took English classes, I took a philosophy class, and those sorts of classes just to kind of get prepped for a move to a different college and a different degree altogether. But ultimately the Lord wasn't asking me to do that either. That was sort of my way of like kind of stepping in the water but not taking the plunge. And so that spring, I think February or so, the Diocese of Rapid City was gathering together people, young men, to go visit the seminary, the Immaculate Heart of Mary Seminary in Winona, Minnesota. And one of the moms of one of the young men, the high school young man who was going on this trip, the mom flat out asked me why I wasn't going on this trip to visit the seminary. And I was so taken aback by her bluntness in her question to me that I didn't have an answer for. And I went home that night and prayed about it and realized that I didn't have a good reason not to go on this trip to visit the seminary. So that night I applied and submitted my registration to go on this trip and went to the Immaculate Heart of Mary Seminary in Winona, Minnesota with these high school, and there might have been a couple college-aged men who went on this trip, but we went and visited the seminary. And that experience was what I needed to realize that the seminary atmosphere, the fraternity that the seminarians had amongst themselves and the prayer life, and even the academic studies, that environment was actually what I needed in order to fully be able to discern and listen to God in my life, and to really discern where God was calling me in my life. So I came back from that trip and was just, again, my world was kind of turned upside down, and I decided at that point that the University of Mary was my way to kind of step into the water but not take the plunge, and the Lord was actually asking me to just dive in. So I contacted the University of Mary and was able to get refunded on my processing fees and stuff for applications, and then I went into about a 2-week discernment period between really trying to figure out if the Lord was calling me to the Diocese of Rapid City, which is where my faith grew and blossomed and it really deepened, or if God was calling me back home. And after 2 weeks of really struggling with that question, ultimately I felt God calling me home. So I wanted to come back home to Wyoming. Wyoming is where I grew up. Wyoming is where my family is. And so I made the call to Father Ray Rodriguez, who was our vocation director at the time, and started the application process. So that all went smoothly, and I was sent off to Conception Seminary College in Conception, Missouri, a Benedictine monastery in the farmlands of Missouri, so very quiet and out in the middle of farmland. It wasn't really close to any major city, which was just a beautiful time for me to kind of quiet myself and to really listen to the Lord. And the time in seminary was just incredibly grace-filled. It was incredibly challenging. You learn almost more about yourself in seminary than you do about God and theology. And I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to it, that in my 6 years of seminary, the first 2 years were at Conception Seminary College. The next 4 were in Denver at St. John Vianney Theological Seminary. Those 6 years was just absolutely phenomenal in, yes, growing and learning about God and theology and philosophy. But there was also a profound spiritual reality that I was learning and growing. Particularly, seminary taught me who I am, and really who we all are. Because growing up in our culture today, and me growing up in this culture, and I think most anybody can relate to it, there's a tendency to think that we are not worth it. That we personally, if anybody knew the real me, they wouldn't like us and that they would reject us. And we have experiences, we all do, of bullying or rejection of some sort. And so ultimately for me, that was also directed at God, that I was like, well, if God really knew me, he wouldn't love me and he would reject me. And so my time in seminary was full of growth in learning theology, but it was also learning that the thoughts that I had of my own unworthiness are completely and utterly false. That each and every single one of us, myself included, is a beloved son or daughter of God, and that we are made in his image and likeness with all our unique gifts and talents, and that God loves us so much that he died on the cross for each and every one of us individually. And I think sometimes we can look at that and say, yeah, well, Jesus died on the cross for all of humanity, and we neglect to apply it to us personally because we don't think that we're worth it, but we are worth it. And so seminary provided me with this solid foundation of spiritual sonship, beloved sonship in God, and prepared me for priestly ministry in that way as I moved into my role as spiritual father, as divine physician, as chaste spouse, as ultimately good shepherd. I'm not pastor yet, but there's still an aspect of each of those identities in me as a priest now that I learned in seminary. So in addition then to the spiritual life, there's also the human formation that happens in seminary, which is incredibly important, that we in seminary grow and learn what it is to be men, to be virtuous men, to be men completely and wholly in love with Jesus Christ, and to bring that love to the people that we meet. And so seminary was this privileged time to grow in academic formation, in spiritual formation, in human formation, and also apostolic formation in the ways that I got to go out and minister. I got to go visit people in the nursing home. I got to minister at a parish. I got to minister to the young kids in teaching CCD and various other ways. I got to minister to homeless people and learn what it was to truly give my life, to lay down my life for the service of God and for the service of other people. So seminary was an incredibly privileged time, and it only confirmed and affirmed me in my vocation to the priesthood. And so my time, 2 years in minor seminary, graduated with a philosophy degree, moving into the 4 years in Denver, where I graduated on May 6th, of 2016 with my Master's of Divinity, and then was ordained a Catholic priest for the Diocese of Cheyenne on May 20th, 2016 by Bishop Paul Aitchen, who is now he's currently our diocesan administrator, but he has been named the Archbishop of Anchorage, Alaska, and he is officially installed on November 9th of 2016. So I will definitely miss him and really, really appreciate his role as my spiritual father throughout my entire time in seminary, because he was ordained a bishop for the Diocese of Cheyenne roughly 6 months before I entered seminary. And then I was the last priest he ordained as the Bishop of Cheyenne. So I have a particularly unique relationship with him in that way. And I am so incredibly graced by his role in my life. And I am so thankful that he is the bishop who ordained me a deacon and he ordained me a priest. And I will miss him as he goes to Anchorage, Alaska. But I figure it gives me an awesome opportunity and an excuse to go to Alaska, since it would be really cool to go up to Alaska. I'll just go up to Alaska and visit Archbishop Paul Aitchen. So that is my story in a nutshell. There's of course a heck of a lot more behind the scenes and a heck of a lot more stories. So I would encourage you, of course, to come in and talk to me, and I would be glad to share stories and different aspects of my own priestly life. I was named the parochial vicar, so the associate pastor at St. Stephen's Indian Mission, which is the parish on the Native American reservation, about 5 miles from Riverton. Father Jim Heiser is my pastor, and I am incredibly blessed to have with me my classmate and close friend, Deacon Bryce Lundgren, who is currently in a discernment process for incarnation into the Diocese of Cheyenne. So ideally, hopefully, he will be ordained a priest soon-ish, maybe within the next, 6 months to a year. We're not entirely sure yet, but he will be ordained a priest for the Diocese of Cheyenne. But currently, he's serving here with me as a transitional deacon at St. Stephen's Indian Mission, which has just been a huge, huge grace for me. He's drawing the cowboy out of me. We've been horseback riding, we've been feeding the buffalo that are here on the mission property here at St. Stephen's, and he's helping me to rediscover that God is asking and calling me to be fully me in my own priestly ministry. So my priestly ministry is not this kind of box of all the things that I think priestly ministry should be, so sacramental ministry and office work, but priestly ministry is really my entire life, and that God created me in a particular way to serve as a priest with my gifts, my talents, and with Father Andrew Kinstetter. So things like growing up on a ranch have been kind of reawakening within me. This cowboy in me is reemerging, and Deacon Bryce is helping me to discover that and to really learn that this time as a new priest is full of challenges, but I'm also in a place where I'm supposed to be learning. I am not supposed to have it all figured out, which I subconsciously thought I was supposed to. Go ahead and read the blog if you want more stories on that, but I'm learning that I'm supposed to be in a place of learning. I'm a baby priest, and I'm still trying to figure out the whole priestly life out. And I'm also still learning more and more and more about myself. So it's a truly wonderful and awesome life. And I am loving being a priest. And I'm finally figuring out how to be at home in my priestly life, how to be home here at St. Stephen's. And it is such a huge grace and blessing. So yeah, that's my story. And this podcast hopefully is a way for me to continue to share those stories with you. So thank you for listening to the premiere episode of The Roamin Catholic Priest. And if you want to contact me, you can by going to RoaminCatholicPriest.com. That's ROAMIN CatholicPriest.com. My mom would be so proud of the pun that is, the Roman versus the Roman Catholic priest. So again, go to RoaminCatholicPriest.com, and right there on the homepage, there is a link that says contact. And go ahead and click that, and you can send me an email and keep in touch with me through that website. I run a blog there as well. So with that, God bless you all, and thank you for listening. See you next time.